So my problem, of course, is that I think, philosophy is just a fucking joke and has been for over 100 years now. Now you can say that there's been progress in philosophy. I would actually there's been progress in converting philosophy to the scientific method and converting linguistics into logic. But I'm not sure there's been any progress in philosophy. There appears to have been none. And everything I can see in it turns out to have been false. Does this mean that so what's the difference between philosophy and philosophizing and theorizing? And that's the change that's happened, is we've moved from philosophizing, which is generally a conflation of the good and the true, to theoretizing, which is the good from which we determine a true. Excuse me. God damn it, I got it backwards. Theorizing for the true from which we determine goods.
Right.
So I just see the 20th century as working our way through logic and ending up realizing it's not mathematics. Right. And working our way through mathematics and realizing it's computational reducibility is limited, right? And the same thing with logic. Linguistic computation is limited and it's falsificationary, completely the opposite of what we thought in both fields. When I talk to philosophers, they're using essentially set theory still instead of operationalism, just like mathematics is using sets rather than operationalism, whereas computation is using operationalism. And physics is using operationalism, and we in incentives are using operationalism. So this is why I say, now that you've got this, I think you've got your arms around it now, though I say what went wrong is Babbage understood operationalizing, and he didn't create a theory of it. That theory took all the way, it's not that computation didn't improve, but it wasn't until Turing that he wrote it down as a theory. And it wasn't until Chomsky's interpretation of Turing in linguistics that got us to continuous recursive disambiguation to the point of, and I'm the one that's taken that and said, okay, here's the fundamental law of the universe, continuous recursive disambiguation at a point of stable relation that we call an identity that persists, right?
Is to have identified the operational secret of the universe is funny to me because it's like the word of God himself.
Exactly.
And it's like, but one of the secret name of God is I am, is the surviving entity, is the persistent one, right? That's and it's an identity that it's just and it identifies itself by being. And
yeah, I think you have a wonderful ability to take this. You've done it a couple of times today, and I only recognized it last week. Is that you really are attracted to symbolism, association between symbolism, which is a sort of set theory. And the thing is that when you do that, you are correctly tying it back to the problem of the past, which is non-causal relations, right? The auto-association between sets instead of causal relations. This auto-associative symbolism is really close to intuition. It's why religions work and storytelling works, whatever. It's because it doesn't require the knowledge that a causal relation does. It just relies on your auto-association to identify a pattern through the telling of a story. And so I actually think this is really fascinating, but it's actually the entire problem. It's that we didn't have the knowledge of causal relations, and now we do. And so we can speak and think operationally in causal relations. But the problem is so many people are so habituated to what I call set theory or auto-associative thinking. They're so indoctrinated in it that they can't evolve to pay the cost of recursively thinking about what they just said as what's the causal relation here. So this explains how difficult the jump is. The reason theology and storytelling work is because you can use anthropomorphic characters with anthropomorphic measurements, sense, perception, emotion, whatever, without actually understanding causality. It's purely auto-associative. It's very emotional. It's incredibly effective for that reason. It also bypasses reason on purpose. This is important, is that it actually, by being inarticulate auto-associative properties of sets, it actually allows you to circumvent the demand for causal relations. So what we're doing is we're saying, actually, here's if God exists, he spoke one word and it was evolve. He didn't tell you the other half of it, or die. And he didn't say, well, and you can die slowly by stagnation, or you can die by quickly by making extremely bad choices. But it's either evolve or die. That's it. There's no other command of the universe. And that's just what we do with the triangles all the time, is create this one fucking symbol that tries to reduce all of that to positive, via positiva, via negativa, and via equilibria. Right? Trade, right? Which causes a stable relation to survive. So we're trying to make humans make a fundamental leap. They had to go from discrete knowledge to continuous knowledge. In other words, from a lot of things that were just learned as facts and into general rules, which we call science. So a very, very large number of general principles reduced to general rules. This is where just about half of the odd increase in intelligence over the century came from. Part of it's from cutting out the stupid people at the bottom through ending malnutrition and whatever else, abortion. But the rest of it happened from generalizing principles, which is what we call science, instead of all these independent fictions that were built on, well, God willed it, or whatever. So we found general rules. The thing is, we're trying to now take these from general rules and sets, which is how mathematics works, to one single rule, right, and operational construction from it.
Right.
So this is a big leap we're taking, right? But the same benefit we got from generalization of norms in religion to generalization of concepts in science and empiricism to generalization of everything into testimony. This is a big set of evolutionary leaps that we're asking people to take. But we have to overcome the fact that just like it took work to get you, it was easy to teach you parables. It was you could advance that into theology. It was easier to teach you some general rules about the universe into a craft, right? But it was hard to teach people to move from those superstitious and traditional means of knowledge to general knowledge of empiricism and science. And it's as big a deal to move people from empiricism and science of sets, realize it's general rules of sets, to the one general rule of operational construction. One of the reasons I love working with you is that you're demonstrating the journey,
right,
that people have to go through, because you're painfully intellectually honest. You're willing to work extraordinarily hard. Just take the compliment,
Thank
please.
you.
You're a good example of what normal people think if they're brought up in theology, philosophy, right, empiricism, and the sciences.
I'm recovering from the 20th century still.
It's a big fucking deal, but it doesn't mean that retrospectively we can't explain it as a really simple thing.
It's really simple.
Auto-associative,
right,
empathic is really different from calculative.
Yes.
And we're giving people not only calculation by sets, which is what they've become accustomed to in the 19th and 20th centuries. We're taking them to operationalism, which gets born back in the 1830s, but it's taken till now to work. And if you look at history, that's what happens. It takes 4 generations. It takes a Babbage, a Turing, it takes the combination of a Hoppe and Popper. I mean, 2 guys who came in at completely opposite directions, a scientist and a philosopher, right? They both come together and Popper says, I learned more from you than I have from anybody except Tarski, right? And Hayek says something similar, is that, well, I learned how to think about this problem from you. But I look at the both of them and I'm like, well, I understand what you're both are doing in context. It's just you're trying to make this conversion, right? And the only reason it happened was accidental. It didn't happen because philosophers succeeded. It didn't happen because the scientists succeeded. It happened because engineers succeeded and developed programming. And from programming, we looked back on the engineering and saw a theory, right? And from the theory, we generalized the theory to epistemology. And from epistemology, we generalized the theory to language. And from language, I got to, holy shit, that's the language. Language is just the means by which we describe the entire universe that is describable by us. And it's all measurements. And those measurements are just what's ever reducible to analogy to human experience. But all language is just a continuous recursive disambiguation of operations, which is objects and operations, into an identity that is unambiguously separable from the background and therefore persists, right? I mean, it's identity. And it's like, okay, well, we're just fucking computers. It's really goddamn annoying at that length. We're just binging and all this shit in and auto-associating it and then trying to create a pathway, which is, in other words, maze finding. And in other words, we're just... And the only reason you can do maze finding is because you have recursion. And how does the nervous system works? It works by no principle other than recursion, which is why the philosophers are lost because they can't even comprehend this concept, right? It's just recursive feedback loops, right? And which is all the time delay is what causes this sensation to compete with that sensation to cause a continuity or not, which is that's all the fucking nervous system does in vast numbers. And we read up, and so you can't even have an adult conversation with a philosopher because the idea of that is incomprehensible, and they're malinvested in all this shit, pseudoscience. So here's what I like about philosophy, right?
Okay.
Right, is despite the fact that it's 99% 99 bullshit. If you just read Aristotle and science, you will actually. I would argue that you would get more from physics, economics, and law than you would get from studying anything else. That's really all. Economics is just behavior, law is falsification, science is constraints, right? I mean, there you go. I mean, that's the whole package, right? So on the other hand, what I like about people who study philosophy is they learn to question.
Yes.
And so I like that philosophy is full of so many errors and it's so bad and so much harm has come from it. I mean, how many people did Marx get killed?
And
how many people did Abraham get killed?
Oh my!
Right. So, how many people are going to pay the cost of the pseudoscience of the Vax era? In the end, when you get to this, it's just I'd like us to study. I'd like us to study lying as I've proposed it, instead of philosophy. In other words, philosophy is the art of sort of identifying all these things that are not right. But the great study of lying is it achieves what philosophy does, except scientifically.
Forensic.
Sometimes I realize what we've done here.
Yeah.
And I realize the great benefit is to man. And sometimes I look at what we've done here and I'm like, man is hopeless. Lying is so desirable. I mean, the brain is a wayfinding machine. Yeah. And it's good. And if it can say, "Oh, look, there's cheese over here," right? It will find a way to find to the pretend cheese. Right. And if you will all follow me to the cheese like the Pied Piper of Hamelin, that's right. Then I can sucker you morons into disappearing under the hill too. Right. I mean, but meanwhile, you're paying me to follow you, to follow me to the promised cheese. Right. Yet, so people say, wow, I get to follow somebody else who's doing my neural computation for me. Right. And I get to follow, and I got social proof of all these other idiots following me. We don't really know we're following the Pied Piper of Abraham.
All right.
The social proof says I can follow the Pied Piper of Marx and Abraham, or the Pied Piper of Chairman Z, or President Putin. You
The-
follow the Pied Piper.
The philosophy department head.
And the philosophy department header, and I mean, just so what I learned in studying philosophy is it's very good if you're going to go into law, because what is law? It's organized as philosophy. But once you have what we've done, strictly operationally constructed, ultimately parsimonious natural law, then law is just a science.
Yes.
And lying is part of that science that we're trying to uncover. And so these things stop being, but utility of, my view is the utility of philosophy is ended because it's been between the demarcation between truth and or science and truth is complete with our work, right?
That was a good introduction.
We need to create social proof of the claim I just made, which shouldn't be terribly difficult because, I mean, there's just nothing we can't, I mean, literally nothing we can't answer. In order to create social proof, we have to exhaust an awful lot. It's not like we're saying, well, we can, we can exhaust this proof of a particular chemical bond in this particular set of proteins. It's pretty easy to claim, but when you say, oh, we can falsify everything, across every discipline, that's something quite difficult. So extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. Extraordinary proof in this case takes a lot of work because there's so many disciplines. But no matter what they come to you against, we're going to be able to do it because basically we've shown the underlying algorithm to the universe and the language we use to describe it across the before physical, during behavioral, and after evolutionary spectrum. So in any event, so that is where we're going, is to talk about truth and lies.